spent 19 months in Vietnam. In 1967, coming back in the spring of 1969. And when I came back, there were all kinds of demonstrations going on in the United States. And my own brother said to me, "Come with me. There's a big demonstration going on in Washington, D.C., and I'm going." And he did. And come along with me. And I said, "I'm done with war. I'm done with looking back. It's in my past, and I don't really want to do anything but move on with my life." And I did in ways that I could tell myself that what I'd seen and experienced in Vietnam was in my past. There was a great antagonism towards veterans, anybody who'd gone to Vietnam, served in Vietnam. And Vietnam vets kept to themselves. I don't think probably hardly anybody knew that I'd been in Vietnam who were around me. And so that's how it remained for a long time. And by the way, I had worn a uniform. You could fly inexpensively after you had returned to the United States if you wore your uniform. And I did wear my uniform one day. I was flying through Charlotte, and I was confronted in Charlotte, and I never wore that uniform again, except upstairs in my office to see if I still fit into it. And interestingly enough, I do, which is interesting. I would I would sit with other people who'd been in other wars. The father of a young woman I was dating had been through World War II and through Korea, and we would just sit and not talk, and we were very close. We remained close to the time he died, and I went to his services all the way out in Fort Sill with one of his daughters. I rode down and back, and she had found comfort in me. And another actual vet who was running a store in the town where I had my main newspaper would call me sometimes and say, "I need to come down." And he'd come down, he'd sit in my office. He wouldn't say anything. We'd just be in one another's presence. Two guys who'd seen what we had seen and knew what we knew, and you don't need to verbalize that. You don't need to verbalize that stuff. It's a very odd relationship that I had with Vietnam, and after I had sold the newspapers and went looking for where I might find medical, I went to the VA, and the VA immediately welcomed me in because of Vietnam vet. It developed I was an Agent Orange guy, and so soon enough they asked if I would sit and be part of a Agent Orange cohort that they were looking for. They were trying to find as many veterans as they could to see how we were all doing, and I said, "Well, sure, fine." And that led rather quickly to this heavyset Aunt Jemima was a sort of woman who I adored. She was black, and I'm sitting in her office, and she said, talk to the dialogue, "Well, honey, I'm going to ask you 11 questions here, and we'll see how you're doing. Do you think you were affected by Vietnam, still are?" And I said, I honestly don't think so. I've gone on, had a successful business, successful life, successful relationships. I'm fine. And so he asked me 11 questions, and when we were done, she said, "Well, okay, you don't think you were affected by this?" And I said, "Well, we're affected by Vietnam, but are we really affected by it? And she said to me, she leaned back and she looked at me and she said, I'm going to use her dialect here, "Honey, you ain't got no idea what they did to you in Vietnam." I had answered positively on 8 of 11, which put me firmly in the PTSD, post-trauma, something or other, SD, I forget what it is. I was a, and from that, then they sent me on over to see if I was willing to go, and I was. I didn't talk to people. So she sent me on over to the psychiatry people who ran hand me this whole list of stuff to answer. And so I kind of worked on this, and the more I worked on it, the more I went, And then you sit down with a psychologist, and, this guy couldn't keep up. What I was saying, he eventually diagnosed me with something or other, and they backed off later on. I don't think I got it wrong. But I went through I burned up 4 other psychologists by the time we hit, and they kept handing me off saying, it's when I'm busy somewhere else, now you can go over here, meet this guy. So finally I wind up with this young man, and I think it was his first, I know it was his first day on the job, and it was the first patient he ever had. And when you talk to these guys, they're supposed to answer a question with a question. But this kid answered my questions with answers. And soon enough, we were going through the book, reading up on whatever, something or other 4, I don't know, look it up. And we did 12 sessions together. And somewhere out, and they begin by him saying, are you, you're thinking about killing yourself, killing somebody else? Are you having anybody messing with you, you're mentally, how you doing? All these kind of things. And so I would answer this, no. And so one day I asked him, I said, are you blah, 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 blah. And he went, no, yes, no. Yes? Yeah, I've got these other, and that's when I became his psychologist. And after that, we sort of talked about him. By the way, the VA, and the reason I went to VA and wanted to talk to the psych people was, they may or may not know what's going on for guys who've, let's just say, seen things or been involved in combat, both of which are true for me. But I had said, if you guys with 6 or 7 million vets, stretching back to World War II and some further back than that at the time, if you guys don't know, then nobody does. But, give it your best shot and so forth and so on. And what I learned was, and I think there's great wisdom in this, the VA is not interested in what happened to you during the war. Did you get shot at? No kidding. Did you get pinned down? Yeah. Did you see people killed? Yeah. Did you have dead bodies around? All that crap. Everybody's, if you get involved in a war, you're going to see warlike things. So, no interest there. But they are interested in predisposition. What was your childhood like? What were your relationships like? What kind of family did you grow up with? What was going on when you were a kid? And then you go to Vietnam, or get involved in war. And then what happened when you came back? Did you have a support group? Were people waiting for you? Were they glad to see you come home and so forth? And if not, if that predisposition that sort of arose in sort of a lonely childhood or an unfulfilled family or whatever, was then bookended with when you came back, there wasn't anybody. Then you probably struggled. And that's a pretty good description of me. And what I said and what I still say of my life is that my oldest brother died when I was 1 year old. My father died when I was 5. My mother died while I was in Vietnam. And I considered Vietnam, by the time I got to Vietnam, my PhD in death and understanding and so forth. That doesn't mean I resolved it. Because after going do-si-do with the VA. I then decided that, we got a chance to go around the world, and we took off and we went out to Australia, and then it was 2009, and there'd been a big economic crackback in '08, and the cruise lines were desperate. So once we got on the ship, on our way to Australia from Fort Lauderdale, they said, well, wouldn't you like to go on to Singapore? And you can go up through, Hong Kong and those places. I've been to Hong Kong and but we're going to go to Vietnam. And I thought, that's pretty good. So, of course, we agreed to do that with the thinking, naive as I was, that I could cruise into Nha Trang, where I was almost killed. And I was pinned down, and people died around me. But I can cruise in Vietnam. I can have a nice breakfast. I can get off the ship. I can go into Nha Trang and walk around for a little while, come back, get on the ship, have a nice meal, and sail away. Oh my God. Well, we get to Nha Trang, and I get off the ship, and I head out to these neighborhoods and places that I've been. And I went, I had emotional issues for about 4 months thereafter. I've always been, suicidal isn't quite right, but suicidal is in the suburbs of a lot of ways that I've felt over the years. And what I say about the darkness, F. Scott Fitzgerald called it, said of us, of all of us, that in our soul, it's always 3 o'clock in the morning. And I call that the vortex. And if you don't stay away from the vortex, if you get sucked down into where it's 3 o'clock in the morning, that's where the souls gather. And if you get too close to using the Icarus, get too close to the flame, you will not survive. I will be sucked down into that. And I've always been very cautious of that. Well, I spent about 4 months circling the vortex, and then another several years of quite difficult times, emotionally, psychologically, and ironically, we'd sold the newspaper. Financially, we were doing quite well, but mentally, I was not. So I decided we're going back to Vietnam, and I'm going back to this house where I lived. And I had found the address where it was. I'm going back to an intersection where I saw things. And in that morning, as we came down the coast of Vietnam, I knew exactly where we were. It was off Quy Nhon, we're off here, I don't know how many places. Coming down to docking at Nha Trang, and I got off and went in with the very morning crowd. The guys who were going and setting up the tents and so forth. Who the hell is this guy? And I hired this kid, and I said to my wife, that morning, and she knew. I had decided I was not going to live this way anymore. That's why we're back in the train. And I said to her that morning, you may not see me again. In other words, this may be it. I don't know what the day will bring. But I knew that I was going back to the house, and I was going back to the intersection, and I was going to stand there and come and get me, guys. It's either me or you. And I was back by 10 o'clock in the morning. I was done. Just go stand in these places and do it, and so forth and so on. But here's the deal. I think you retain one picture. I saw a lot of stuff. I was involved in this, that, and the other thing. I was in the field for 4 months. And so on. And Nha Trang, that story we'll tell some other time about Ted, where I was pinned down in the villa and pretty much concluded, I thought rightfully, but it was not right, that I wasn't going to make it out. But anyway, I have a picture. And there it is. I think the mind indexes one picture, okay, to tell the story of all the stuff you saw and all the stuff that's still probably up here. But we don't need to go through all that stuff because my mind says, okay, you want to remember that experience and that time and those 19 months? Here it is. There it is. I can see it. I can see it right now. And I think that's curious because I think we index things that we save and archive, maybe totally forget, but I don't think we forget anything. And so that after that day, I was okay. There's a lot more that we may say at some other time about that day and about the people. I was a captain in Vietnam, so I was kind of more in charge of what I was commanding over the years. But after that, my wife and I, we went back a third time, and we had a really nice time. We sailed the Mekong. We went up to Hanoi, which everybody should do. It's a really wonderful, interesting French town. We went out to Halong Bay, beautiful place, and just had a very nice time. Our guide in Hanoi asked me, "Have you ever been to Hanoi before?" And I said, "Well, actually, I have." He said, "Oh, well, when were you here?" And I said, "I was on a bombing run up here in 1968," and he loved it. He absolutely loved it. So we'll talk maybe more, but that's kind of the underpinning of Vietnam. I am deeply affected by Vietnam. It was one of the turning points in my life, and I can index them. I can index the last time I saw my father when he died when I was 5, and I can index the night of January 30th, 1968, when I was pinned down and decided I'm not going to get out of this alive, so I may as well go up and sit on a roof and watch the neighborhood be level. And we'll talk about Vietnam, the war experience, me, military guy, not, and all of that at another time.